name is Scott Brownlee. I'm the head of the pre-law community here at Fortuna Admissions, and we're really delighted to bring you our second summer installment, this webinar in our Law School Confidential series, Demystifying Harvard Law School and the T14. Today, we're going to give you some tips and tricks to help map out your acceptance journey. I'm joined by a team of panelists who have all of the Harvard Law School knowledge and certainly the T14 knowledge as well. They are either folks that have read apps for Harvard or gone to Harvard themselves. So it's a great chance for you to ask questions of them, and we'll spend a good portion of today letting you do that. And just to give you a sense of what the agenda will look like. So I'll just briefly tell you who we have today speaking for y'all and sharing insights. And then we'll talk a little bit about what a day in the life at Harvard Law School is like, maybe a little bit counter to Legally Blonde and the things we see out in the media. Then we'll talk about tackling the HLS app. Dylan, DéJeune, and Corey will all share their insights for that. And then we'll talk a little bit about your approach to the T14 law schools, and you'll get to hear from Corey and DéJeune, who applied themselves in terms of their strategies that they deployed to be successful. And then we'll have some audience Q&A. So I would say if you have a question, a burning question that you came to the session with, please go ahead and throw it in the question portion of Zoom if you'd like. I will be queuing those up. We also have had a couple of questions submitted in advance that we'll go ahead and get started with. So thanks, audience members who emailed those to me. And just to give you a sense of who we have in the room today, I'm sharing for you all. We're very, very delighted to be joined by three of our strongest and most amazing law school coaches here at Fortuna. We have DéJeune Antoine, who is a Harvard JD MBA, so dual degree for DéJeune, and she's the VP and Associate General Counsel at Liquidia Technologies. We also have Corey Hester, who right before the call I was talking to, he's just starting his third year at Harvard Law School, where he is a JD MPA candidate. Corey also has an MBA from Dartmouth Tuck, so definitely a great resource for applying to top graduate schools across that spectrum. And then Dylan Kahn, who joins the Fortuna team from Harvard Law School, where he was an admissions reader for several years. So between the three of them, I think you'll get some great insights about Harvard specifically, but also about kind of your T14 application and how you can optimize it. And just for those of you who are joining right now, my name is Scott Brownlee. I'm also a Fortuna coach, former pre-law advisor at NYU, and will be moderating today's session. So with that, what I'm going to go ahead and do is go ahead and turn off the screen there and get us kicked off with some questions around a day in the life at HLS. So let me go ahead and spotlight Corey and DéJeune, because we're going to have y'all go first. So DéJeune and Corey, we've all seen or heard about Legally Blonde and Elwood's journey to Harvard Law School, but you two have really lived out that experience yourselves. Can you both share a bit about your experiences at HLS and what you think maybe the biggest incorrect assumption is that people make about life as a student there? DéJeune, do you want to go first potentially?
Sure. So I came into law school having worked for about 6 or so years. And I knew pretty clearly that there were some things I wanted to achieve personally, things that had nothing to do with being in school at all. And then also I had some professional development goals, some things that I had discovered from working, and just some things that I wanted to do differently going forward in my career. And I knew I wanted to pivot into healthcare. I had been working as a management consultant at financial services, but I had a degree in science and engineering, and I wanted to go back into the healthcare space. So with that in mind, I was pretty targeted about my coursework, my schedule, extracurricular activities. So I spoke with alums, law school students from a few different top law schools to kind of understand what I call their process, if you will. So how they studied, how they outlined, how they planned their days, how did they fit in working out, time for family, things like that. And that really gave me a good starting point for like what a day in the life would look like for a HLS or law school student. And, you know, my time there was pretty interesting. I, would wake up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, read for class that day, which could include, 40 to 100 pages of reading per night. I'm sure you all have heard the horror stories, if you will, about that. Taking notes, outlining that kind of process, and just being prepared for the cold call. So, I think that's where the movies and things of that nature might actually be accurate. You get a little bit of a snapshot of what it's like to sit in the classroom and expect to be called on. And, there's a kickoff for the line of questioning about the facts and other analysis of the cases that you read. And I like to do things like, attend lunch talks, You get some free food, you get some intellectual stimulation. You get introduced to and educated on some really important topics. So at the end of the day, I was able to make time for those things that I was concerned about, like, going to the gym, going home, doing some mindless activities, watching some reality TV, resting, cooking, eating healthy, that kind of thing, and doing organizational meetings. I think one of the biggest, though, incorrect assumptions that people have is maybe related to some of the things that I listed, which is, people say that you can't have a life outside of law school. And, I don't think that's correct. I think if it's a lot of work, it's very rigorous. The structure of the curriculum is rigorous. But if you're really intentional and careful about it, you can have an amazing life where hopefully, like me, you can end up appreciating the time that you had in law school, because outside of class, it really gave me the opportunity to engage with so many smart people who are extremely passionate about a bunch of different causes and initiatives. And to be quite honest, it's a level of stimulation, intellectual stimulation, and enlightenment that I've never really been able to replicate in my corporate career. So hopefully that answers the question.
Fantastic. And Corey, I know that you're probably getting ready for those cold calls, right? As a third year, not you have a little bit of bandwidth here, but anything you want to kind of add to that? What was your perspective like?
Yeah, so I think my journey, and we'll talk about this a little later throughout the session at HLS, is pretty unique. But I've had a wonderful time at HLS. I know everything that DéJeune said is pretty accurate to the T. Cold calls are a real thing. I think third year you don't get as many cold calls. I think that's more first and second year. But yeah, I think the students there are very intellectually curious, and I think that's something that hasn't been replicated in some of the other programs that I've been at, just at that caliber, at that level. But everyone's so kind. Everyone's very interested in learning a lot of different things, and I think that creates a really great environment. But as you go through your first to your second year, everyone comes in with an idea of what they want to study and what they want to learn and what they want to get involved in. And that really fluctuates from, first year to third year. You see a lot of different changes, people trying different things. And I think Harvard Law School affords you that ability. There's a lot of opportunities to get involved in so many different aspects. It's a huge university too, so you can even branch outside of the law school, where I'm at over at the Kennedy School, if you want to work on more policy related issues. And so it affords you a lot of different opportunities that you can really get a lot of unique experiences in that aren't so much replicated at maybe smaller schools or other schools that don't have this bandwidth in Cambridge, where you can even get involved in MIT. And so I think through the navigating yourself through the different classrooms, the different courses, all of the different electives that Harvard offers, and then especially all the journals and the clinics that you kind of can go in and out through the different semesters, is really something that's unique to Harvard Law School. But I think one of the incorrect assumptions that I've found is that for recruiting, Harvard Law does a really good job of prepping and making sure that individuals and students are really prepped and ready to go for recruiting for 1L summer and 2L summer. But also it's not as competitive as you might think. And I think that's the biggest incorrect assumption that I experienced going in. And I think the reason why it's not as competitive, cutthroat mentality, as a lot of people seem to kind of pinpoint a lot of these top law schools, is just because the breadth of resources that Harvard Law has, not only for advisors, career advisors to the students, whether you're recruiting for private sector or the public sector, but they offer so many different avenues to really for you to really achieve your target goals, your target companies, and they do that really well, and they do it early on compared to a lot of other law schools as well. And I think that is an incorrect assumption that the resources provided for a lot of the different students are really great, and it really helps you ease, and you don't have to worry. There's not a lot of anxiety around recruiting for different internships and externships. And I think Harvard Law School does a really great job at that.
Awesome. So it's great to hear your perspective, Corey, as someone who's on the ground, kind of in the third year, taking advantage of all the resources. DéJeune, as an alum, we always focus on the school getting in and kind of being a student, but as an alumna, like, what does that look like for you? Like, have you been engaged? Like, what's out there for alums of the school?
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities. There are speaking opportunities, opportunities to serve on panels as well. One of the things that I really appreciated is that when I first left law school, I went to Big Law. And a lot of times you are so heads down when you're a junior associate in that environment. But the law firms really do want you to be able to stay engaged with the universities that you attended, right? That connection helps to strengthen kind of the pipeline of good talent from the schools. And so I've done some panels that kind of introduce this niche area of law that I practice in life sciences licensing. And then the recruiting events are really great because you get to go back and talk to folks and like Corey was mentioning, really calm the nervousness that you see in some of the students about what that process looks like. You get to have your feet on the ground again and interact with students. So that's a great opportunity. There are some things also that kind of feed you as an individual alum. So you still have access to career services. I've actually used that when I've been in the process of making certain pivots in my career or considering making certain pivots in my career. And then even personally, there are group chats and things on the side where one example, there are some women who went to HLS around the same time as I did. There's like a 4 or 5 year span of us that we recently reconnected and got together. And that group has been really instrumental in helping us get referrals for things that we need, even personally, but also salary negotiations, things that can be really tricky and information that may be hard to obtain publicly. People have been open to sharing kind of what their experiences have been when they're trying to go in-house or when they're doing a lateral move when the market is like this or like that, or other people in their network. And so, that has been a great benefit to me. So, I think there's, the career services, there's the opportunities to come back and volunteer. There's the relationships and things that you make, all of that has been helpful for me.
Fantastic, fantastic. And while you were talking about this, we had some enthusiastic questions come in. One that I did want to kind of put out to y'all really quickly is around how students balance the joint degree. And since both of you are doing a joint degree, could y'all just each share how you did your joint degree and then like how many years it was? That was a question that someone had, and I know that's a different answer for different degrees. So, Corey, you want to do the public policy side first?
Yeah, so with the Kennedy School and Harvard Law School, it's a 4-year degree program. Now, the actual dual degree is with the MPP, Masters in Public Policy, and the JD. I'm an MPA student, and so that is ad hoc. And you have to get specific approval, and it's a little bit of a lengthier process. But the one thing that I found out about Harvard Law School, and they don't really advertise it that well, is that they're very flexible when it comes to dual degree programs. I have several classmates that are doing an MBA at Stanford, and they're doing their JD at Harvard Law School. I have another one that's doing a master's of bioengineering at Columbia and a JD at Harvard Law School. And so this is not really something that they advertise, but once you're in, especially if you're in at Harvard Law School, but also if you're in at another program already and you're looking to apply, they're very flexible. The admissions committee is great. And also the registrar's office is as well, and they're very helpful and informative. And so the difference though with Harvard Law School and other law schools in terms of a dual degree program is that when they require you to do the core, so it depends on the dual degree program that you're in. Like I think at NYU Law, if you do a dual degree program there, all three, especially if it's an MBA JD, all three of your law school semesters have to be back to back, and then you can kind of section the MBA or the MPA on either side. And so it really is different. So make sure to take note of that when you're looking at the outline if you're wanting to do a dual degree program anywhere else. But I find HLS to be really flexible. You can do Kennedy School at the beginning, you can kind of do it at the end. But I've had a great time with it so far. And as Scott mentioned, I'm in my last and final year of both the MPA and the JD program.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Corey. And DéJeune, on the JD MBA side, what was that experience like?
Yeah, so it's a 4-year program. You have to apply to each school separately. Once you get admitted into each program, you are in the JD program. As far as matriculation, you choose the school that you want to attend first. I think historically, most people have done law school first. There was a period of time where those who chose to do business school first didn't actually finish the program. That's been changing over time, but just something to kind of take note of. And I think that's a little bit of self-selection. Many of the folks who chose the MBA first kind of came from certain finance backgrounds and intended to go back into those finance backgrounds. And the value proposition for them for law school just diminished after they sort of had that first year MBA experience. So it's just something to think about in terms of, you know, which program you want to attend first. They are very different. They are intensive, all-inclusive first-year experiences, which is why you kind of don't start mixing classes until your 3rd year in the program. In that 3rd and 4th year, you're doing courses across both of the institutions. It tends to be a pretty small program. It can vary, but you know, it's usually less than 10 folks per year who are doing that JD MBA program. There is a seminar course that you take in your 3rd or 4th year that brings everyone together who's going to graduate in those next 2 years. And then there's events throughout the years for you to get to know the other folks in the JD MBA program, because as you can imagine, some folks starting at law school, some folks starting at business school, and then you switching those programs. They try to create these experiences outside of that so that you get to know your classmates, because your law school and or business classmates from your first year experience will likely graduate before you leave. And then your JD MBA group will kind of be the ones that you're left with. And so that early introduction, there's been a lot of work in recent years to kind of create more integration early on so that you know the JD MBA students.
Fantastic. I'm so glad that we had both of you from different walks of dual degreedom there, so that we could kind of see how different those two paths are. Thank you both for sharing. I'll go ahead and pull you all off, and then let's go ahead and bring on Dylan, and we will talk a little bit about the app itself. So Dylan, having worked for HLS as an admissions reader for the past few application cycles, you have read literally thousands of applications, right? And you have a very strong sense of what successful HLS applicants bring to the table. Could you share with us what you would say beyond GPA and LSAT? I know everyone in the audience is thinking GPA and LSAT, but beyond those, what are the top 3 traits that accepted students tend to possess, you know, that you saw?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That's such a great question. And, you know, I think I want to, or I'll first say, you know, I think people are always interested in the traits that are most desirable in applicants, right? But I think one thing that I want to focus on is, you know, the traits of one's application that are signaling readiness and preparedness for law school, right? I think those are ultimately the most important things that I'm thinking about as an admissions reader when I'm behind the table. And, you know, while there are multiple ways one could signal readiness, both with your stats and also your written materials, you know, I think these 3 things that I'm about to kind of outline, I always observed in successful applications. And, you know, excuse me if I dart back and forth a little bit. I wanted to make sure I wrote this down for all of you so that I could get it all out. But I think successful applications, or successful applicants, are passionate about what they do, and they have clear and compelling intention around why they're seeking a JD. And I think something that I realized over several years in the admissions office as an admissions reader is that in American society, there's kind of this prevailing idea that when you're not quite sure what you want to do, when you want to make a pivot, or one is kind of witnessing something in society they want to change, some people kind of pivot to law school as the answer to what they want to do, right? And that's not always necessarily the best idea given the rigor, time, and financial investment one has to put into a law degree. And so, you know, it's a doctorate. And I try to remind people that it's a doctorate. It's 3 years, really intensive, really expensive. So, you know, in other words, successful applicants don't seem as if they've kind of spontaneously pivoted to wanting to get a law degree, right? Number 2, I would say they effectively link tangible experiences, whether they're academic, professional, or other, to their interest in obtaining a law degree and then entering the legal field. You know, so strong applicants, in other words, are really able to articulate why their experiences matter and how they've oriented themselves kind of towards law school and the legal field. Right. So I think quite often we'll see that people are kind of outlining their interests in the law, but they're not necessarily making the connection of why law school is the correct pathway for them. And what you don't want to do is to have to make the admissions committee or the admissions reader make that inference, right? You want to spell it out really clearly and succinctly so that it's graspable and tangible for them. And then number three, I'd say that successful applicants are really good at convincing the reader that now, right now, is the best time or is the most logical time for them to pursue that JD. When I was a reader, I was always asking myself, does a JD feel like the most logical next step for this person? Do they really need this right now in order to advance their career goals or realize their potential in the legal field? So, if potentially you're someone or an applicant is someone who is just starting to explore the legal field, starting to develop an understanding about what they're passionate about, and how, maybe a JD would be helpful in that sense, right? That's probably not the best time to jump into a law degree, right? That development really has to happen prior to entering into this degree. That is expensive, and also just takes a lot of time. So those are kind of the three things that I tended to notice in successful applications.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Really, really comprehensive feedback there, Dylan. It's great to have that perspective and the timing and all the different factors that come into play, separate from the societal expectation of you don't know what to do, go to law school, which is, I remember being a liberal arts major and having that told to me. So thank you for kind of offsetting that. I want to ask you another question that I think is really timely and that you'll have great context for before we bring DéJeune and Corey back. Harvard Law School uniquely has two personal statements, right? The kind of the general personal statement and then the statement of perspective. This is obviously unique among law schools. You read a lot of these. Can you talk a bit about what a successful approach to crafting both of those effectively looks like?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And I think actually I really appreciate HLS for giving applicants the opportunity to write more about themselves and not feel pressure to kind of consolidate it all into a 500-word statement, which is really, really challenging. It's always harder to write something shorter than it is to write something longer. So I should, when you're applying, if you decide to apply to HLS, think about the statement of perspective as an opportunity to continue telling the admissions committee more. And so what I would say always when you have the opportunity to write more than one statement, right, you want them to complement each other and reinforce each other without repeating information, right? If you're being afforded that extra space, if you're being given that present of a little extra, 300, 400, 500 extra words to tell the admissions committee more about yourself, don't copy something from off your resume. Don't repeat kind of thematic information from your personal statement. And, it's a little bit tricky because I fully realize that one's purpose and one's perspective are often tied up, right, inextricably as part of your identity. And that's something that people want to talk about. And so while this isn't necessarily the only successful way to go about this in the early stages, my general suggestion is to first brainstorm, right, why am I going to law school? That's kind of the statement of purpose. And then the second question is, what experience-informed vision will I bring to law school for the perspective? And then think about together how they make a general argument about why you should be admitted as a member of the 1L class. And so trying to tackle those questions, right, I think together rather than as kind of two siloed statements about yourself is often easier for some people, right? Because splitting your personality or trying to into those two kind of buckets can be challenging and also feel a little bit artificial. So thinking really thematically about the statement you want to make overall, and then making sure that those statements play off of each other and are also underscoring the same qualities about you, I think is really important.
Fantastic. No, that's a great approach. And as you've been speaking, questions have been pouring in. Audience members, we definitely will address those. But I want to go ahead and bring back DéJeune and Corey. And I wanted to ask y'all to give some feedback and perspective here. Obviously, both of you, it's been several years since you completed your HLS applications. But thinking back to that time, Do you mind sharing how you thought about your own personal statements and the statement of perspective, if you had one, Corey? I'm not actually sure when that was implemented, but did you anchor those around big turning points in your life? Was there like an aha moment when you're like, I have to be a lawyer? Like, what did that journey of personal statement creation look like? DéJeune, you want to go first?
Sure. So for my personal statement, I wrote about the things and the person that shaped me the most, which was my dad and his upbringing. And that was such a huge part of my identity, and it really formed the foundation of my life philosophy, that it was really the only thing that made sense to me to write about. Now I did tie that, as Dylan mentioned, to my career choices and my decision to pursue law school. And then also because I have such a non-linear career path, right? I did science and engineering, then I was in consulting, then I did the JD MBA, now I'm practicing law. I know that at each point in my career, I've had to kind of explain what that looks like. So when I was walking through how these formative experiences I had through my father and his upbringing impacted my career choices, I was also sort of explaining how I pivoted from one thing to the next. That's just something that I know I will forever sort of have to explain and help people understand. And so to the point that Dylan made, for me, it was outlining kind of step by step how I arrived at law school and how I arrived at HLS's door, and making sure that when I knocked, they wanted to open it. And so I really focused my personal statement on that.
That's such a great image, DéJeune, of like knocking at the door at the right time where they can answer it, right? Making sure they're not, it's syncing up. It's the right time of day, as it were. That's fantastic. I love that. Corey, what about yourself?
Yeah, so the way that I viewed the personal statement is, really tying together all of the different components in my application, and to a single kind of narrative essay about my journey, what led me here. And similar to DéJeune, I focused on the people that got me to this point, specifically one of my mentors, but also my upbringing, the environment, where I was brought up. I'm from Alaska, and so the community was very unique there. The traditions that I was involved with and was raised around, and just that kind of cultural upbringing, I think, provided a lot of interesting early values and perspectives on what shaped my decision to pursue higher education and then ultimately law school. And I think weaving those threads in and out of these different parts of my life and kind of encapsulating all of that into a general personal statement was my strategy. And then the optional essay at the time, I don't actually remember if they called it a statement of perspective, but there was an optional essay, and that's essentially the same thing. But I used that to expand upon a small paragraph in my personal statement, and I was more detailed in that optional essay, and I used it to provide additional clarification that I didn't put into the personal statement, and that allowed me to really expand upon more complex issues, why specifically the JD, why I needed it now. Going back to what Dylan was saying, you really have to connect all of these different points for the admissions committee, and they need to be very comfortable that this is the right fit for you. Our program is the right fit, and now is the right time for you to attend this program. And so I think writing that all into both my personal statement, but then really like fleshing it out and really honing in on the finer points within the optional essay was really helpful, and I would encourage all the applicants to absolutely use that. But it was an interesting perspective that I had going into the Kennedy School too, and I think because I was at the Kennedy School at the time I applied to the law school, it provided that underlying knowledge of the Harvard institution more broadly. And I had taken classes there, I had volunteered there, so I had a little bit of a unique perspective going in, which again I was allowed to write out and flesh out in that optional statement of perspective.
Fantastic. Thank y'all both for sharing there. That's actually a good transition. We have so many questions in the Q&A that I'm gonna go ahead and move on to just thinking about T14 app strategies really quickly with y'all, brainstorming a little bit, and then we'll jump into questions. It looks like folks are really curious and keen to hear from all of you. So thinking about your school selection, I know y'all both had different answers. Corey, let's actually start with you since you were kind of already in a program when you applied. Can you tell us about how you approached your law school application process? Were you applying to other kind of T14s? Like, what did that strategy look like for you?
Yeah, so I think what really informed my decisions for law school applications and which particular programs was several things. I was coming off of an MBA at Dartmouth, Tuck, which I loved. But that rural environment, growing up in Alaska, that was obviously a rural environment itself. But I think going to school in Hanover, 2 hours north of Boston, I was able to understand the distinction between schools like the University of Virginia, Cornell, maybe Yale Law School, ones that aren't connected or right in the middle of a large urban setting. And I think that has a huge that had a huge impact on my decision of where to apply and the programs that I wanted to be involved with. And because I had that kind of rural experience, which I loved, I absolutely loved that. But I wanted that kind of urban, kind of suburban feeling, which is what Harvard kind of afforded. But I know that I wanted a school that I could get a lot of, because I had done my MBA and I was in the middle of my MPA, I wanted a school that had a lot of cross-registration opportunities and had a lot of great affiliations with other programs. As DéJeune said, the connection between the law school and the business school is close. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of programs and classes and courses and ways to get involved. And I really wanted that. And some law schools didn't have as close of an integration with their other sister schools under that university. And so that was one of the leading factors that drove me to really stay in Cambridge with Harvard Law School. I have a lot of friends that went to the West Coast, that also went down to Georgetown and DC, that were dual degree candidates with Harvard Kennedy School, which also too, on a side note, Harvard Kennedy School is the largest melting pot of dual degree candidates in the country. You have every sort of dual and triple degree candidate there that you can probably imagine. And so, but I felt where I wanted to go with my future career goals, especially in trying out private sector, big corporate law, Harvard Law afforded the best possible opportunities and support to do that. And because I was at the Kennedy School, it was just seamlessly integrated. So that decision was a little easier for me. But again, I think in terms of the other T14 schools, it was just the amount of resources that were available to me for recruiting. Two, it was the environment, suburban versus rural, urban versus rural. And that is almost analogous to like the amount of distractions that you're going to have, because if you're in the middle of a city, there's a lot going on. And I really wanted to be closer with my cohort. I wanted to get to know my cohort really well. And then also that kind of cross-registration that was available at the program. So those are kind of the three reasons why I decided to go with Harvard Law, but also the factors that I was considering when I was applying to other T14 schools.
Excellent. Yes, the rural urban distinction is really important. To your point, once you get there, it really affects your whole 3 years. DéJeune, can you tell us about your experience building a school list? I don't know if you were focused on JD MBA specifically, or if you had kind of JD only programs in your target list.
Yeah, so I applied to 6 JD MBA programs in total, and I didn't do any JD only or MBA only applications. It was all JD MBA, 6 of the T14 law school programs. I applied really early in the application cycle because I was applying round 1 to the MBA programs, and I wanted those decisions as much as possible to kind of line up so that I could make a decision in the event that maybe I got into one program or didn't get into the other. I wanted to make sure that I had as much information as possible around the same timeline. And I prioritized schools that did 2 things. One had a strong healthcare program. On the law school side, I identified that by like the clinics and the coursework that was offered, as well as the placement of alums. And then also on the MBA side, there's a little bit more to it about like the fit and the culture of the school. So that really mattered to me. I didn't want just a strong healthcare law program and then have a horrible fit on the MBA side. So I was trying to balance those 2 priorities. And then I was also focused on being in a major city, because at the time I had some personal considerations that made that make a little bit more sense for me.
Fantastic, fantastic. So while we're on the topic of HLS specifically, we talked about personal statements a little bit. I was very curious to hear from both of you. Did you use the same kind of, you know, core template for your personal statement across the different schools you applied to, or did it morph? Did you really write it just for Harvard? Could y'all share that? And Corey, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You've done a lot of work, and I think there are definitely components of your application, of your essays that you want to, that are just resoundingly true and that you want to share with every single law school. But I found in my personal experience and other clients that I've helped is that you want to try and as best you can tailor it to that specific program. These law school programs know you're applying to more than one school. They're very aware of that. But the danger is you don't want to have a very generic kind of vague application. There are very specific differences. There are nuanced differences which each of these programs, and obviously the admissions team knows that. And some of it is they're curious to know, again, going back to what Dylan was saying, is that, are you aware of that? Is this the right program for you? And I think if you can really talk to the culture, the environment, the clinics, the courses, the professors, and there are ways to weave that in through your personal statement and through your application. And I think this really speaks to your understanding that it is the right fit, this is the right program, and now is the right time. And so you are going to need to change components of your personal statement and your statement of perspective, whether that takes the form of an optional essay for other schools, but you do want to tailor parts of it, but don't be afraid to recycle kind of like the core theme, because that should be true from your upbringing, where you are, whether it was a turning point, whether you've always thought this way. But I find it very useful to really make sure that it is tailored to that specific school, excuse me, and that can take the form of a few sentences, and that can take the form of a couple paragraphs too. It depends on every single application.
Great. DéJeune, how about yourself?
Listen, I am all about efficiency. So I agree with Corey. I too wrote my statement such that there were specific paragraphs and or sentences that I could replace based on what my genuine interest was and based on the research that I had done in other schools. And just practically speaking, for the first draft that I wrote, I highlighted those sections in yellow, because when you're doing that, you have to be very careful and you have to proofread very carefully, right? So in my first format, it was highlighted in yellow so that I knew when I went to upload the next one for another school, those were the sections that I had to replace. And then I did a clean read. And if you have the benefit of having a Fortuna coach, you can have, obviously your Fortuna coach help you do that clean read. And even someone else at home with you to be able to do that, just to make sure that you aren't keeping any untidy kind of artifacts from the other schools when you're submitting those kind of school specific personal statements.
I love the color coding, DéJeune. That's such a good idea, and have definitely helped people found, the wrong school's name in the personal statement. It's always good to have a second and third pair of eyes for those things. Let's bring back Dylan so we have the full triumvirate here. Dylan, just want to ask you a question that's related to this before we kind of go into our larger format Q&A for y'all. Obviously, you were reading a lot of apps, and so on that topic of kind of the recycled personal statement, did you ever get distracted by app materials that felt copy pasted, for lack of better phrasing, from other schools? Is that even something you noticed? What was your perspective on that, Dylan?
Yeah, great question. And I'd echo everything that Corey and DéJeune have already said. Right. I think you want to be efficient, you want to be true to yourself in terms of having the content, reflect what is true across all these institutions. But I'll say that there's a million different ways to write a successful essay, right? And I do think that it is important to customize that section or that sentence or that two sentences about why you want to attend that institution specifically to that institution. And that means doing some research, as Corey said, about the clinics, the professors, academic emphases, maybe partnerships across the university you can take advantage of. As someone who's read thousands and thousands of these, you can tell immediately when someone has written kind of a generic scaffold that they will insert the name of a school into. And typically that takes the form of, I'm really interested in the academic excellence or like the reputation of this institution. I'm really interested in the great professors, right? Well, that's going to be true at any T14 and, any T50 school out there, right? And so showing intentionality about having done one's research, I think, is really important. And I think when you do have spaces where you're just inserting and taking out names of institutions, that's when mistakes tend to happen, right? I've seen people talk about Stanford in their HLS app. It's not going to necessarily like end the game for you, but it just does show that there was some oversight in the editing and that there was perhaps a generic scaffold that someone used. So I would recommend, doing your research and being specific without going overboard, right? Don't talk for 4 or 5 paragraphs about why you want to attend Harvard specifically, but finding that balance is kind of going to be the trick.
Fantastic. Great segue into audience questions. So this is one that came in actually a couple days ago, which I thought was really interesting. And maybe Dylan, we can have you start and then see if Corey and DéJeune have anything they want to add. But the question is, when pre-law students ask what kinds of experiences they should cultivate on their resume in college to try to impress a top school like Harvard, what would you recommend that they do? What are the experiences that Harvard weighs more heavily than others? This question comes from somebody who's kind of in the Midwest, maybe in kind of a flyover state, and they maybe didn't have that prep school experience or those legal connections. So what kind of experiences would you be looking for, Dylan?
Great question. And I will say, there is not a specific type of experience that they're looking for. There is not a specific brand of experience we're looking for. I think what's most important and what you can demonstrate most successfully is that you have kind of depth of commitment, depth of interest, and a willingness to really activate the opportunities around you, right? And so I think someone who is really committed themselves to a nonprofit, really worked in a local law office, and have done really great work in those settings is going to fare much better than someone who just had like a 2-week externship at McKinsey or on Capitol Hill, right? It's about demonstrating, right, that you're committed. This is the time to enter law school. Not that you have necessarily these branded things on your resume. And I'm not trying to discount those experiences at all. But I think sometimes people believe they can be used in place of, right, a more ongoing commitment to a cause or an organization or an ideology that you care about. So, you can find successful ways of doing this wherever you are, right? I'm from New Mexico and Colorado. There's not a McKinsey office there. So there's plenty of ways that you can go about this.
Oh, that's wonderful. DéJeune, Corey, anything y'all want to, I mean, you've actually met students, right? So you can talk about the skills and experiences they cultivated. Any additional thoughts either one of you would like to add? And you just come off mute if you want. It looks like you both have something. DéJeune, you want to go first?
Oh, no, I can just quickly say, like, I second what Dylan said, but I would just also add that how you describe your role in the things that you have done. So you have to do something, right? And I think it's about how you describe that. So focus on your leadership. Focus on the diversity of the group of people that you worked with, the impact that you were able to have, your curiosity, also where you spotted issues, right? Because that's something that happens throughout the law school experience and curriculum. Were you able to identify an issue in the organization that you were in and help create a solution? So there are ways that you can tell a story about something, even if it's band, music, farming. Think about your role, your leadership, your curiosity, how you spotted issues, how you helped to solve problems. And that gives them a greater idea of who you are as a person and whether they can see you in the classroom.
Fantastic. No, I love that. Corey, what would you add?
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, definitely echoing the impact. I think showing that every organization that you're a part of or group or, community center, nonprofit, whatever it is, that you left the organization better than when you found it. You did something, you contributed something. The second thing I would say is progressive leadership. I think, if you're starting as a general member and then you get elected to the executive board of your sorority or honor society or fraternity, or you're starting at secretary and then you move to president. But that kind of progressive leadership is also very informative to the admissions committee. And then third thing, and unique to me, I would say, is I was a journalist and a journalism major for undergrad. And so I wrote a lot, and I had a publication section on my resume, and I found out that was a little bit unique, because I had written a lot, and I got published in 4 to 7 different local, statewide publications, a couple national publications. And so I think you will be doing a lot of writing in law school, and so I think if there's ways to showcase that for your college newspaper, for your local town newspaper. I think getting those reps in that sort of a professionally accredited, recognized fashion, I think is probably maybe more on the unique side, but I think it was very much appreciated, and I know it's not something that you always see. So yeah, if you're writing about something, if you have a thesis you want to turn it into an op-ed, definitely explore those ideas both within your respective college or the town that you're from, write an op-ed. But I think that again, if it builds to the narrative that's a part of your application and builds to your story, I think that will add a lot.
Love it. That's wonderful. Wonderful context there. So I've got a question for each of you, as fate would have it. This first one is for DéJeune. DéJeune, someone's wondering, could you tell more about what it was like to apply to school and go back to school after working? Why did you decide to work before applying to law school? An interesting question.
Maybe I'll answer the second part first. So law school was not my intended career path. I wanted to do biomedical research. I happened to graduate at a time where the economy crashed and all my job offers were rescinded or companies were going on immediate hiring freezes. So I was having interviews canceled, weeks or days before they were supposed to be happening. And so that sort of allowed me this opportunity to reevaluate the skill set that I had gained through my degree and what my opportunities would be. I worked as a manager in a call center while trying to figure out all the things in life. And one of the consulting offers that was that I had interviewed for while I was still in school, they sort of reinstated that, and I worked as a consultant. It was interesting. I gained certain skills, and consulting is actually what introduced me to the idea of being in client and professional services. I thought about ways that I might want to change that experience, and I thought about the things that I loved about that experience, and figured that in order to pivot my career back to healthcare, one way that I could do that is through law. So I applied to law school with the goal of being an attorney in healthcare, but not knowing really much how that looked. I did know as an engineering undergrad that I could do patent law specifically, but I didn't know what other options were out there. And so I started talking to folks to figure out that I could do healthcare regulatory law, contract law, healthcare litigation, et cetera. And so I applied to law school as a way to make sort of the best of the play the hand that I had been dealt, I guess. When I applied, what was it like to go back to school? It was hard because you're making money and then you are spending money or taking on a lot of debt, right? So that opportunity cost and the cost change of living even was just very different. I would say also, outside of the cost, the level of academic rigor in an advisory position, even a technical one like the one I was in at Accenture, is very different from law school. So the idea that I had to refocus and do so much reading rather than creating work product, right? Like I was going on site to banks and financial services institutions, looking at their processes, sitting side by side, doing interviews. I had a lot more interpersonal interaction and then backing away and doing some heads down work and then coming back and presenting. Law school is very different. It's a lot of work that's assigned to you. You're by yourself reading, writing, outlining, studying, and reviewing. It's a lot of individual heads down, reading intensive kind of work. That is so different from what I was doing before that I really had to rethink and restructure my day and really think about how do I focus now? How do I study now? I had been out of school for a few years. And so some of that was just a learning process. Some of it was a lot of fun. And there were some things that I was able to transfer. I was always a morning person. I always woke up early to kind of get a head start on things. And so that was transferable to the experience. So I would say it was tough. It was a big transition, but it's something that you can prepare for. And there will be aspects of whatever you've done beforehand, whether it's undergrad, working, a gap year, that you can likely bring into the experience to help make it successful.
No, that's great context. And it's also helpful to hear that, you went through the challenges of like economic downturns and things and came out the other side and navigated that. Having that resilience really important. Corey, here's a question for you. Someone was curious. They wrote in even before the session. They were wondering if a master's degree would help with law school admissions. And I know with Harvard Law School, everyone's looking for any little edge they can get. And you obviously had a grad degree when you applied. Can you talk a little bit about, once you got to campus, did you meet other people with master's degrees? Was that like a trend you noticed? And also, like, how did you use your degree, if at all, when you were in school?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think I don't actually know the stat off the top of my head, but I think it's maybe around like 15 to 20% of students at HLS have a dual degree, or in either enrolled in a dual degree or have a master's or some other terminal degree prior to matriculating at the law school. So it's pretty common. I know there's a lot of individuals in my cohort that had other masters in international studies, masters of science in journalism. And it was really interesting because it really speaks to the uniqueness about the cohort and the class, the entering class that the admissions committee really puts together. And there's so many individuals that have just a very niche, unique interest in something, whether it's nanotechnology and the law surrounding that, or brain implants and the legality surrounding that. I mean, just such unique individuals. And I think, first of all, having a master's degree can really help clarify your reasoning for wanting to go to law school. If it fits in with your narrative, maybe you have that kind of technical analysis, that technical engineering background, and now you're wanting to get into IP law, right? And you have a master's in engineering. That's very informative to the admissions committee and also builds on why you want to do what you want to do. From a more practical standpoint, having a master's degree can help alleviate concerns about maybe a lower GPA that might not fit right within that kind of range that or the average, the median GPA that Harvard Law School or any other law school is looking for. And I think if you get like a 3.5 in undergrad, but you get a 4.0 and a master's of biology or a master's in journalism out of school, that can help alleviate a lot of concerns with the admissions committee. So there's a lot of benefit to it, but there's also a lot of individuals that don't have master's degrees too, and that comes straight from undergrad, or as in mine and DéJeune's case that we had but yeah, there's a lot of ability to also pursue master's degrees, as I mentioned earlier, at Harvard Law School, and I'm sure a lot of other law schools too. And so really explore those ideas. I mean, this is one of the last times of your life where you're going to have a lot of opportunities for your brain to be a sponge. And as DéJeune mentioned, and I definitely agree, is that the intellectual stimulation you're going to get in law school and the breadth and depth of people you're going to be around is going to be unmatched and probably unparalleled as you enter the workforce. So really enjoy it and make the most of it.
Great, thank you for that gloss there, Corey. Dylan, don't want to leave you out here. I've got a question for you from the audience. We've got someone who says they were only involved in law-related extracurriculars for 4 years in college, so mock trial, law fraternity, but they haven't had work experience in the legal field. Is there anything that they can do to kind of overcome that deficiency or that perceived deficiency when they apply in terms of how they're framing things? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that's really where the agency lies. And this is something that both Corey and DéJeune have discussed, right? It's about how you frame your experiences and how you go into the experiences you've had, right? And leverage those in a way that's going to be compelling and also really clear to a reader, to an admissions committee. So, I mean, one thing people have talked about that I've seen, I've also worked with clients as well, is, right, they can really leverage academic experience, right? Sometimes things will be law adjacent. Sometimes they'll have taken philosophy of ethics classes. Sometimes they'll have taken human rights related classes. And those are things that can be parlayed into a larger discussion about one's passion for the legal field, for what they want to do with their life during and after law school. Another thing that can be really helpful kind of in the academic realm is really prepping your recommenders to talk about your potential to succeed in a law program and why a law program would be really beneficial to you, both for intellectual, personal, professional reasons. So it's about looking holistically at all the things that you have kind of in your toolbox and then being selective about what you take out and what you want to talk about and what you want to excavate. That was something that Corey talked about. So, you know, it's hard to say something definitive because there are so many ways, as I said, to have a successful application. You know, work experience can really buttress things that you've already demonstrated in academic or extracurricular settings. But, you know, if some of the other stats are really strong, you know, there's the opportunity for things to balance out. So I think it's really dependent on who you are, what the rest of your experience looks like, and also what your stats look like, because I do think that the admissions process is really holistic. I know that's something that all admissions offices say, but at least at HLS, it was really holistic. And I'm proud to be able to say that.
That's kind of a funny transition, Dylan, because this next question is about a specific identity. So thinking about veterans, military veterans applying to school, this person's wondering, and Dylan, I think this is a great question for you since you've read apps recently. Is there anything vets should highlight in their application to really kind of stand out, or maybe something about themselves they should highlight that wouldn't occur to them about their background?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that that's can attend to in their written components of their application that are really helpful to an admissions committee or an admissions reader is making it digestible for a general audience, right? I think that that's obviously have so much great experience in their respective fields, but a lot of the terminology, a lot of the structure in which they work is very highly coded and very highly specific to a military setting. So ensuring that you're able to communicate what you did, what the leadership role looked like, what the responsibility looked like, what the intellectual engagement looked like to someone who's not in the military is really important. So it's in that sense, it's just really thinking about your audience. And the thing I'll say about admissions readers is they're generalists, right? They've read a lot, they've seen a lot, they have a pretty decent understanding of everything across the field. Just because, you know, they're exposed to so much content. But, you know, most of us have not been in the military. Most of us have not had, you know, super technical engineering experience. This goes for any other discipline outside the military that's highly specialized, right? You want to make sure that it is digestible for the general audience. And part of what you can do to kind of ensure that is obviously work with a coach, but also have someone, you know, outside of the military context be reading that app and giving you feedback on how digestible and how you know, pertinent it sounded to them. So I think that's my advice there.
Fantastic. And just one more question that we can throw out. I'd like to hear if Corey and DéJeune specifically have advice here. This is a good one to close on. So if someone's wondering, what's a good way of researching strengths and weaknesses of each law school? So maybe for both of y'all, like, where did you go to find your research about schools? Were you looking online? Were you talking to people? Corey, where did that start for you in terms of researching the schools?
Yeah, so I think early on, I think it was Reddit, because that's where you get kind of the unfiltered perspectives. But you know, also, you know, take it with a grain of salt. There's a lot of misinformation on there too. But that's where I started. But I think the bulk of where I did a lot of my research was time intensive, but it allowed me to curate you know, several sentences, but in my personal statement that ultimately took hours and hours of work. But it was just talking with people. I think talking to current students, talking to alum was important, and talking to you know, staff members, whether that's professors, whether that's individuals like Dylan and the admissions committee. The admissions offices for Harvard Law School do a lot of outreach, and they're at conferences. And going to those conferences, whether it's online or if it's in person, introducing yourself, and meeting those individuals. That way you can reference something that they said later in your personal statement if it really resonated with you. But really talking with people, and that just takes time. And I think, I don't know, maybe overall I talked with maybe about a dozen different people over the course of a few months. And some people you can just cold reach out to on LinkedIn. And I ended up getting a couple of Zoom meetings set up over that. Just ask for 15 minutes of their time, have your questions prepared kind of in advance. Make sure you've done your research. Don't ask questions that you can find on a website, or that it'll take 5 minutes of Googling, but be very intentional and thoughtful about the questions that you can ask. And I feel like the alum are, if they've got the time, they're more than willing to, if they sense you're a serious candidate when you reach out via email or LinkedIn or, whatever it is, just do your research. And I feel like most of them are going to be very generous with their time. And they're going to help you, they're going to help provide perspective on Harvard Law School and probably other law schools. So that would be my advice. And that's what I did, was talk to individuals.
Great. DéJeune, what about yourself? I saw you head nodding. I saw you some agreement there.
A ton of the same things. School websites, I like to reach out to club presidents and people running the clinics. I also did the cold emails and LinkedIn reach outs, personal networks. So I don't have lawyers in my family, but there were some folks who went to law school from my undergrad, which is rare because actually most of the folks from Xavier University of Louisiana, they are doctors and pharmacists. But for those who went to law school, I tried to chat with them. And then also there are some like 1L programs out there. I can't recall all the names of the ones that I looked at or spoke with, but there are programs that help you sort of understand what law school life can be like. And so people who are representatives for those programs, I also spoke with them.
Fantastic. Well, that is a great note to wrap on. Hopefully, audience members, you really enjoyed today's session. Just want to invite you all to keep this conversation going. So if you have more questions for us, you want to engage with us, you can go to our Substack. It's free. We post all kinds of great content. We'll post a recording of today's event there. And also, if you want to continue the conversation with a free consult about your law school journey, we are happy to do those. We're known in the industry for being very friendly and supportive and having those conversations. So you're welcome to do that. You can go on our website. The address is there to get that set up and chat with myself or another member of our team and think more about your journey. Regardless, we wish you best of luck in this app cycle if you're applying, or in future cycles if you're applying later. And thanks very much for joining. Have a great rest of your day and have a wonderful start to your fall. Bye, everyone. Thanks.